His journey to improve the lives of others and ultimately to become the prominent force in American policing continued, first in Boston, where he got his start in American policing, and then on to being the top cop in the transit system in New York, the NYPD superintendent, LAPD's chief of police, and then back to the top cop at New York Police Department for the second time. What I can tell you about Chief Bratton is he loves cops. He loves the communities he serves, genuinely does, and he loves kids, and is the absolute only reason that you are here today in POPP. He is the reason POPP exists. Chief Bratton has always been a voice of calm in the face of chaos. He's been a voice of leadership in the face of the unknown. And I think most importantly, he's been the voice of truth in times when sometimes few are willing to listen or speak it. Without further, I'd like you to hear from him, Chief Bill Bratton himself, the cop, the husband, the father, the grandfather, and of course, my chief, who is here today to give you some of the most important lessons that he's learned over the history of his policing in America, and an opportunity to learn the importance of service. I'll turn it back to you, Joe, so you can kick it off. And Chief Bratton, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sandy. Joe.
Yeah, Chief, thanks so much. And from the students here at POPP, we're so glad to have you. And we welcome your remarks and talking a little bit about your book. So take it away. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sarge, and thank you, Sandy Joe, and certainly Ira, thank you. My understanding is that many of you have received a copy of my new book, The Profession, which is a memoir, my 50 years in American policing. It's a memoir in the sense that it tells through my experiences and my perspective what has happened in American policing over the last 50 years that has continually progressed during that time, continually reformed. It is in a much better place today than it was back in 1970 when I came into the business, although there is no arguing that the profession is in an extraordinarily difficult position at this time, probably the most difficult in those 50 years that I've ever seen. The book is also a history of policing, and it begins with a quote from John Timoney, a colleague of mine, former chief in Miami, former NYPD, former commissioner in Philadelphia. And the quote is that those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it, and those who know police know we don't know our history. And that is true, that very few police academies, very few police departments teach the history of their organization or of their community. And I think that's a mistake, because it's very important to know where you've been so you can be better informed in terms of understanding where you are and where you need to go. And so what I've tried to provide in the book is that history, if you will. It is also a book of stories. You're going to meet some wonderful people, and much of the book focuses on Los Angeles, my time in Los Angeles, which I think was some of the 7 best years of my 50 years. And I think also a very significant success in the sense that a department and a community that had been literally at war with each other for almost 50 years finally found a way to see each other and to come together. And even now today in the turmoil of 2021, you benefit from that history during the time of the concentric period. For those of you on this call, we have a mix of current police officers, possibly some retired, and young men and women who are desirous of becoming police officers. For those of you currently serving, thank you for your service, particularly in these critical times. We need you more than ever. And for those young men and women thinking about coming into the profession, I strongly encourage that. You will find it can be extraordinarily rewarding. It is what you will make of it. But I have an expression that I developed in 2003, and I used it for the first time in a speech to a class of recruits on that very famous field over the Legion, where they all graduate, right? For over the whole history of the department, every recruit is marched onto that field. And I talked to them about the expression, cops count, police matter. By that, I mean that the actions of an individual cop really count in the sense of in their life, the life of the community they're interacting with, and in the totality of the police profession. And when I talk about police matter an incredible amount in our society, in our democracy. We could not have a democracy without the police. We are the essential center thread in the garment that is American democracy. And we have basically at times seen that thread badly frayed. At times it is almost broken, but thank God it has basically held over time. So the concept of the profession is that, particularly you young people planning to join it, I encourage it. Because every day when you pin that shield on your chest, that most famous police badge of any in the world, and I can still remember the first time, the day I was being appointed as police chief back in 2002, and it was handed to me, and just feeling the weight of it and looking at it and understanding the significance of it, and then having my wife pin it on my chest before we went off to the appointment ceremony. Every time I put that badge on, before I pinned it onto my blouse, I looked at it just to remind myself of the significance of it. And what is the significance of it? It is the power that has been given to you, the trust that has been placed in you by the public to protect them, to serve them. And every day you have an opportunity when you put that badge on and go forth into the streets of Los Angeles or any city in America, that you can have an opportunity to have a day of significance, a life of significance. So at the end of 25 or 30 years, and believe me, those years go by much too fast, you can, when you take that badge off for the last time, look back on those years, and the proudest thing you can say is that I had a life of significance because I stayed true to the values of that badge. So the police profession, while it is under significant attack, a lot of inappropriate attack at the moment, the reality is this country could not exist without it, without us, without you. The challenge for us is always to try to do better, to always keep trying to reform. And to do that requires each individual officer, but it also requires leadership. I have consciously sought throughout my career to be a leader. I want to go into troubled agencies and change them. I want to, Jim Collins wrote a great book a number of years ago. And one of the features of it, Good to Great, was he described a bus that a leader, basically the challenge for the leader is get the right people on the bus, get the wrong people off the bus as fast as you can, and then get the right people in the right seats. And by that he means people who believe in your vision, destination you're trying to get to. And policing is always a career that you're always moving toward a destination. You're never going to get there because the destination that you'd like to get to is a crime-free, a disorder-free community. And since we live in a world of humans, that will never be the case. But we can strive to make that community as safe as possible, to keep the citizens as safe as possible, to keep ourselves as safe as possible. And so the idea of that bus, I've always thought of myself as a leader, recruiting people onto the bus. Someday I was going to get off, but I wanted somebody from that bus to then take my seat and continue moving it forward. And I think in the case of the LAPD, I was very fortunate that the next guy behind me to get on that driver's seat was Charlie Beck. And then behind him, Michael Moore. I still regret that Sandy Jo never got into that driver's seat. I think she would have done a phenomenal job taking it down the freeways. But sometimes life doesn't give you what you would want. But in understanding the history of policing, it's important to understand where we've been, where we are now, and where we're capable of going. I was very fortunate in my young career that in the Boston Police Department, a department that, as I talk about in the book, was very corrupt, very brutal, very racist, similar to many police departments in the country at that time, long before many of you were even born. And I was very disillusioned after spending a lifetime wanting to be a cop. But then, thank God, something changed. And what changed was the leadership of the department, and drove home to me the point that one person, a leader, can make a phenomenal difference in a department, in the case of police, in a city, in a state, in the country. And I've always sought and strived to be a leader, to be a person that has a life of significance, a person that can make a difference, so that the profession that I was a cop in, that I counted, the profession I was in mattered. And then looking back at my 50-year career, I think I've had a very good one as a leader, as a cop, and that the profession that I'm proud to be part of has made a difference over those years. But in 1972, 73 in Boston, the department was really bogged down. It was not going anywhere. And the mayor of Boston at that time recruited into the city an outsider, something that those of you in LA just don't tend to like outsiders, but sometimes it works out pretty well. And into Boston came Robert DeGrazia. Robert DeGrazia was the first change agent, the first transformational leader I had been exposed to. And thankfully, I ran into him very early in my career because he became my role model, my inspiration for the next 45 years. He took a department that I had become very disillusioned with and turned it upside down. He changed everything, promotional processes, the academy, dealing with corruption, dealing with issues of race. And he was only there for 2.5 years, 3 years before he moved on. But he made changes that to this day are still lasting. And that's what I've sought to do as a leader, every department I've gone into, that the changes that I and the people I surround myself with make, that they last and they're capable of being changed and reformed to meet changing times. But one of the things that DeGrazia changed was the idea that the promotional process, which had been bogged down, you had to have literally be on the job about 20 years to successfully take and compete for a sergeant's position. He changed that and changed the civil service test, so it wasn't just a rote memorization test, but really was a test where you had about 8 or 9 books that you had to read on management, on leadership, on race relations. You had to pass an assessment center of 3 people grilling you on an oral board. And the assessment center was extraordinarily grueling. One of the toughest tests I've ever taken was that assessment center. But I studied and I studied and I studied. And I came in #1 on that written exam, and I came in #2 on the overall exam. So at the age of 27, I was promoted to sergeant. I was the youngest sergeant in the history of the Boston Police Department. And the rest is history. If not given that opportunity, most of what happened for the next 45 years for me and what happened in your city for 7 years during my time as chief of the LAPD would not have happened. And so he was my inspiration. And I'm going to read a couple of things to you about my thoughts about leadership. Because the discussion today was not only about the importance of the history of policing, but about the importance of leadership. Because although you come into the department as a police officer, as a rookie, as a P1, that some of you may over time aspire to move up in the ranks. And the LAPD, in the case of the department I know so well on the West Coast, offers phenomenal opportunities to keep moving up that Jacob's ladder. But for people like Sandy Joe was a lieutenant, I think, when I first went to the department. And by the time I left it, and you had moved up to assistant chief by that time, and you had moved up that career ladder.
You made me the deputy chief.
Deputy chief, okay. Didn't hang around long enough to get you up to assistant chief. But in any event, it's the idea that you have the opportunity to find a place that you're comfortable in. If you're comfortable as a P3, a slow or whatever, that's great, or a detective. But if you want to be a leader, you also have that opportunity, and you have to kind of reach for the ring, if you will. And I've always wanted to be a leader. And I've developed, I think, some leadership traits and techniques over time that I'll share. But then I'll go back to something that I really want to embed in each and every one of you, those of you who are current officers who might not have been exposed to it, and you young people that were aspiring to be police officers. It's the 9 principles of policing that were put together by Sir Robert Peel in 1829. Think of that, 1829. He had created the Metropolitan Police, and he was putting together the guidelines for the policing of that great city by these new police officers. The term coppers comes from the idea that the police in London had copper buttons on their uniform. They were also called peelers, was Robert Peel. But I'll speak to his 9 principles of policing in a moment. But let me first discuss with you leadership, what I think is essential elements for a successful leader. And some of you who are leaders already, Sandy Joe, Sergeant Kunz, and others who might be on the call, you'll recognize some of these traits because they're things that you practice. And they are effectively the following. A successful leader makes people want what they need, not what they want. Think of that, makes them want what they need, not what they want. A successful leader needs to be able to function in different environments. As a police chief or a police leader, the environment is constantly changing. No 2 days are ever alike. No 2 crises. And policing is all about crises. No 2 crises are ever alike, but you learn from each one so that when you face the next one, that you're better prepared to deal with it more effectively. I believe there are 5 major attributes for a successful leader. 1, optimism. I'm the eternal optimist that I came into your city when nobody had any hope that you could do anything about policing and race. I came into New York in 1990 when nobody thought the worst crime capital in America could ever be turned around. I'm an optimist about the importance of policing and our ability to make and create great change. The Indian civil rights leader Gandhi, and I'll paraphrase an expression that I've used to model myself after. To create change, you must become the change that you seek to create. In other words, you need to be a leader that believes in your vision so that others can basically become adherents to that vision and support it and expand it. And when you leave, can basically take it as their vision. So as an attribute of a leader, it really is that you need to believe in the change that you think you can create. So a leader needs optimism. He needs passion. He or she needs passion, commitment. You need to be a great crises manager. You can't run from crises. In policing, you need to run toward it, but you need to run toward it equipped to deal with it. You need to be a risk taker. I purposely come into police departments in crises because I'm a risk taker. I like to gamble that I and the people I surround myself with can make the necessary changes to restore a reputation of a department that has had it badly tarnished. And lastly, personnel selection. The critical success of any leader is dependent on no one person can do it alone. You need to literally develop a team. And that team has to be people who have multiple skills. So I think I'm pretty smart about some things, but a lot of things I'm not smart about. Technology, I'm a Luddite when it comes to technology. But in every police department I've gone into, I basically bring the latest technology by basically surrounding myself with people who understand it, understand what the needs of police are. In the case of the LAPD, starting in the 21st century, started acquiring some of the greatest technology that you could imagine. And in fact, led a lot of the revolution in policing that I'll describe in a moment, occurred in the LAPD starting in that time period, 2002 to 2009. It has continued going forward. And what do leaders do? They lead change. Life is always changing. Policing is always changing. It never stays the same. It's never stagnant. If it stays stagnant, it dies. So we are constantly, I have to laugh in some respects at all the demands that we reform. We've been reforming for 50 years. And a lot of the reforms that we've implemented, people just don't recognize the professionalism, the commitment, the passion, the risk-taking, the life, basically risking your lives to basically help others. A lot of that, unfortunately, is not acknowledged by many, but thankfully it's acknowledged by most. And that's what you're serving, basically the people that need you the most, and they're the ones that call 911, they're the ones that call 311. They need you, and they need you there to help them with situations they can't deal with. And how much more satisfying can you have than a career that allows you every day to have a life of significance, a life where you can create positive change for so many people by your simple presence, by your simple action. And so what leaders try to do is effectively imbue in their organization that spirit of the importance of what they do, but the importance in policing, particularly of doing it the right way. I always talk to my recruit classes, my promotional classes, about the idea that as a police chief, I'll support you if you make a mistake, an honest mistake. But if you're corrupt, if you're brutal, you're racist, you're gone. If you're corrupt and criminal, I'm gonna prosecute you to the full extent of the law. If you're racist, I'm gonna try to get you out of the department as fast as I can. And that's the reality of it. But if you're working hard and you have integrity and you're doing it the right way and you make a mistake, well, we'll then try to retrain you, because the job is full of risks, split-second decisions, that the issue of qualified immunity that's so much out there at the moment. Prosecutors and judges have absolute immunity. They get hours to look at an issue. Police officers, you might have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds to make a decision. So this argument about reducing the personal liability and protection that is afforded to you now as a police officer with qualified immunity, I push back heavily against that. Can that be reformed? Certainly, everything can be reformed, but done away with? Not at all. Talk about a disincentivization. So fortunately, there seems to be some settling of the dust around that issue going forward. That's just one of the many myriad issues that American policing is having to face at the moment. But it's going to require continued effort by every individual police officer, every individual police leader. And what I'd like to emphasize with leadership is this idea that what do leaders do? They create change. And I love creating change. I love creating a Super Bowl team around me made up of so many different people who are given opportunities they never thought they might ever have, to basically have their viewpoints known, to have their ideas looked at and implemented. And that's effectively what you do as a leader. You try to create an environment, a creative environment. And I'm going to give you a brief history of policing in about 3 minutes. That'll take you over 50 years, but bring you up to where we are now. I came into the business in 1970. The model of policing at that time was called the professional model. And the idea was to try and take a profession that didn't have any of the professional attributes. We didn't have a body of knowledge. We didn't do research, that most people in policing had high school educations. And we began to change this professional model. Excuse me. We had our educated officers. We had standards. We had guidelines. We had research. But the professional model was also embracing a style of policing that created for the next 25 years a very problematic situation. Policing was told in the 70s that all the issues facing society, racism, poverty, unemployment, all the things that were thought to be causes of crime, that police could not do anything about that. So police, this new professional model policing, should focus our skills on improving our response to crime. And that was a major mistake in terms of changing a focus from prevention of crime to responding to it. We created 911, and unfortunately we created an unbearable workload on police. By 1980, the City of Los Angeles Police Department was not responding to over 1 million calls a year from people calling 911. Imagine that, 1 million calls from a citizen looking for help that the department did not have the manpower to respond to. So we were failing at that mission of responding, and we were measuring our success by the numbers of arrests, the numbers of clearances, but we weren't measuring our success by what we should be preventing, people from being victimized in the first place. And as we went into the 80s, it got just worse. 911, we couldn't keep up with it. We couldn't keep up with the growing crime problem of drug epidemics, firearms, gangs, the advent of gangs, particularly in LA. So by 1990, it was the worst crime year in American history, in Los Angeles, New York, the whole country. And that professional model clearly was not working. Fortunately, a new model, a new philosophy, echoing Sir Robert Peel's, which I'll get back to in a few moments, came into being. That's called community policing. Community policing was based on 3 foundations: partnership, police working with community, a shared responsibility to focus on problems. Every community has a different set of problems. No 2 communities have the same set of problems, but we, the police, were trying to police as this was monolithic. We came to understand that what's going on in Watts is different than what's going on elsewhere in Hollenbeck, that we really needed to empower our division commanders to be able to deal with the issues in their community in partnership with community. And what was the focus of all these efforts? It was the idea to prevent crime. And so in the 90s, American police embraced the community policing philosophy. We were supported in that we got 100,000 more cops from the federal government. Federal government passed a lot of money for research, for dealing with domestic violence issues, for dealing with the crime problem. And we were successful. Overall crime in the United States went down by 40%. In certain cities, New York, for example, New York City by 2019 had reduced homicides by 90% and overall crime by 80% from what was going on in the 90s. For 25 straight years, it went down. LA had similar successes, although it was a little more of a roller coaster. Crime would go up, then go down dramatically. But starting in 2002, we were able to start pushing it down and keeping it down with a police department that's one of the smallest in the nation per capita. But as we came into the 21st century, we had a revolution in that evolution of policing, and that was 9/11. 9/11 changed so much in American policing, because for the first time, American policing was going to have to focus on terrorism. We shifted a lot of our energy to that problem. In LA, we created the counterterrorism unit. Mike Downey, John Miller, 300 officers out of a very small police force focused on that major problem. But we also began to, in dealing with crime, we began to focus using data. Sean Malinowski, who was a young sergeant working for me, eventually went up to become deputy chief, chief of staff. was a whiz on the use of data. And working with him and George Gascon, George, when he was still with the department, I had them develop a real-time crime center, a center where we could report crime and respond to it much more rapidly. And we developed in the LAPD a model of policing that was called predictive policing. The idea that gathering information very quickly using the new algorithms that were being developed, that we could predict that with a certain time frame, a certain location, a crime might occur. So it became a very valuable tool for us. Policing, as it moved into the 21st century, is now grappling with all the new issues of social media, the internet, cybercrime, drone technology. It's a profession that's always changing to meet the changing needs and the changing crises. And the only time I was in New York, when I went back to New York, I took a lot of the LA models back to New York with me. The SLOW program, which I'm a big, big fan of, this academy that you're all attending, the POPPS Academy, took those concepts back to New York. We created the NCO program in New York. We created the idea of breaking up our precincts into 4 sectors. Each sector had 2 NCOs. We changed our training at the academy to emulate the LAPD training. We also created the excuse me, concept that you're very familiar with, field training officers. So our recruits coming out of the academy, or at least their first 6 months, could not work except with a field training officer. So the idea in policing in the 21st century, we learn to learn from each other. We learn to collaborate much better. And in New York, we developed what we call precision policing. There was an old TV show back in the 50s and 60s called Dragnet, Jack Webb. And Dragnet referred to a term that was very much in vogue in the 50s and 60s. When a crime would occur, the police would put out a dragnet, go out and round up all the usual suspects. Like a fishing net, you scoop up a lot of people, but you scoop up a lot of innocent people in that dragnet. So one of the big challenges for policing, and a lot of things that people push back on us, in LA in particular, was that we were basically policing with too broad a brush. And so what we eventually moved toward, and we still now practice even better with the new algorithms, artificial intelligence, facial recognition, is precision policing. Precision policing is the idea of identifying out of that large criminal population who are most likely to commit more serious crimes. In LA, you have the expression, the shot caller. We got 100,000 gangbangers. If all of them were engaged in shootings and murders, the place would be unlivable. But fortunately, there's a small number of them who actually commit the majority of the serious crime. So by focusing on them, we're able to get them out of the gangs, get them out of society, and effectively take out the leadership. And so that's been the challenge with precision policing. And so policing has been reforming, that we are constantly trying to, like a doctor. A doctor in the old days dealing with cancer would hit you with a large dose of radiation. He'd hit you with a large dose of chemotherapy. He'd hit you with a large operation to take out the cancer. But over the years, as technology developed, as his ability to practice medicine with more precision, he could effectively get in and treat a much smaller area of your body with radiation, with chemo, and might not even need the operation. So that's what policing's been doing. Policing has been trying to find a way, like doctors, to do no harm, or if we have to from time to time harm the patient, to do it with minimal use of force. So in the book that you have, excuse me, I think that most of you have received, courtesy of Ira, it'll expand on a lot of what I'm talking with you about, and there she is holding it up. Actually, Ira, there should be a test for your students to make sure they read the darn thing. But in any event, it will fill out a lot of what I've been discussing with you. But as we come to a close, I want to reference what I talked about earlier on. That's Sir Robert Peel. And Sir Robert Peel, the 9 principles, which are my Bible. Moses came down from the mountain with 10 commandments. Basically, I come out of Boston with Bob DeGrazia with Sir Robert Peel's 9 principles. Let me read a few of them to you, because I think for the officers who are on this call, this will certainly resonate with you. But for you young people who are desirous of being police officers, and I encourage you, work hard, study hard, because we need you. The American profession has never been more in need of young people like you. Majority of you are minorities, majority of you are probably Latinos. And going forward in America of the 21st century, If we're going to deal effectively with race issues, ethnic issues, immigration issues, we're going to need a very diverse police population. We're going to need you. And we're going to need people who have been trained, who have educations, who are committed. And one of the greatest things I was exposed to in Los Angeles during my time there was the magnet schools, the Explorer program. And I was wife creating the initial POPS program, which we are now basically going into the successor program. There's no place in America, in American policing, that works so hard to attract young people into policing, train them, and keep them. So take advantage of the opportunity you're being given. I would have loved, as a young kid in Boston, to have had an opportunity like this that you're getting. Would have loved it. And so understand how lucky you are to be in a city, in a committee, in a community, in the schools that you're attending that really want to support you in what I think is one of the most important jobs, most important professions in America. But let me close with just a couple of Sir Robert Peel's principles. The first one I mentioned is the basic mission for which police exist is to prevent crime and disorder as an alternative to the repression of crime and disorder by military force and severity of legal punishment. Prior to 1829, there were very few police entities in the world. And so in democracies, they didn't want to use the military, so they created the police. And police operate under different guidelines in the military. But the whole idea was to use the police, not so much to respond to crime and disorder, but to find ways to effectively prevent it. The ability of the police to perform their duties is dependent upon public approval of police existence, actions, behavior, and the ability of the police to secure and maintain public respect. That is the tension right now. In so many of our communities, particularly minority communities, there's a lack of trust, a lack of respect. Unfortunately, in too many of our police officers, an inability to see the community, to see beyond the black face or the brown face or the Asian face, to see what's behind those faces, what are the issues, what are the problems, what is the history. And we need to do a better job of seeing each other, because going forward, if we don't see each other, we're never going to resolve the problems that we're facing. Another one is the degree of cooperation of the public that can be secured diminishes proportionally to the necessity for the use of physical force and compulsion to achieving police objectives. We understand in American policing today, police and the officers on this call understand it. So often when they go to enforce a rule, a law, they are met with resistance. And that resistance requires them to use force. And the idea is to try to use only the necessary force. But so often that force, even though it's lawful, it looks awful. And particularly in this day and age of body cameras and smartphones, it's recorded and we get these snippets of what looks like police brutality when effectively they're using authorized techniques. But because any use of force looks awful, it's just the way it is. And so the challenge for police is to try to reduce the amount of resistance that we engage in when we're all policing the community. And that's going to be the challenge for you young people coming into the profession, because you're going to experience that, because I don't anticipate in the next couple of years that's going to diminish. And it's going to really fall on your shoulders to start policing in a way that the communities start trusting us more than they have in the past. An incredible challenge. But I think that the American police profession is up to the challenge. I'm an optimist, as I've talked about, and I've watched this profession change over 50 years, and the change has been almost all for the better. We are so much better than we were, but the good news is that we can still be better than we are. And that's going to be your challenge. It's going to be a challenge as young police officers coming up through the ranks and eventually someday leading this department and others. So in closing my comments, thank you for your interest in policing. Those of you who are in policing, thank you for your continuing service in these extraordinarily difficult times. But I don't regret for a minute the 50 years of my career. I've had a lot of ups and downs, and policing is about ups and downs, career opportunities that you take a test for promotion, it doesn't happen. Well, go back and take it again. That, life is, not a lot is given to you. A lot of it has to be fought for and earned. And believe me, the right to wear that badge that's up on the screen there, that most famous badge in the world, that shield, that it is in the shape of a shield because it is intended to protect you. because what are you doing with that shield in your chest? You are then protecting the citizens. So you need some degree of protection for yourself also. But the best protection you can have is the trust and respect of the community who will work with you and share the responsibility for making their communities even safer. So thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you today. My apologies for my voice. You're about my 5th Zoom call of the day. And it's and by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm usually talked out. So hopefully the voice held up enough for this conversation. Sandy Jo, do I kick it back to you or to Sergeant Coons? How does this work?
I will kick it back to Sergeant Coons, but I just personally would like to thank you. What you have done for policing in your lifetime is amazing. And I think that everybody here really has been able to take away many key points that you've done. One thing I want to say before I give it back to Sergeant Coons, something that I've learned from you over the years is that don't shy away from the crisis. That's where you find the opportunity for incredible change.
You run right at it. You look for them, actually.
Yep. And I learned that from you. I kind of knew it sort of instinctively, but it was not the way leadership in policing looked historically. So thank you for that incredible gift. I have taken it with me, and I will always be grateful for your mentorship.
Yeah, I was playing off that for a moment, Sandy, that the idea of crises and looking for crises. Crises provides the opportunity to accelerate the process of change. That so if you're competent in handling with it, that you can get through it, learn from it, and be better prepared for the next one. But crises also creates sometimes the need to apologize. That, and as a leader, you need to understand. And I think, unfortunately, for the LAPD, for most of its history, it was never willing to admit a mistake or apologize for the mistake. And you're always going to make mistakes in policing. That's the reality of it. So I look back to the MacArthur Park, no reference to Sandy Jo MacArthur, but the MacArthur Park event of 2007. That was something that required a very quick and sincere apology and a lot of changes in policies and procedures in the department. So out of that crisis came great opportunity, great challenges. We met the challenges and provided a lot of new opportunities to work with our communities. So thank you for bringing that up, that the right crises is usually a negative word. I always try to make a positive out of a negative.
Yep. Thanks for all your gifts. Joe?
Thank you.
Yeah, no, and thank you very much for taking the time to talk with our students. A lot of the questions that they had raised revolved around, their future in law enforcement and their how they can best prepare and their mindset moving forward. And I think you addressed those things marvelously. So thank you very much. As we close out, I do want to throw to Ira Krinsky, who's obviously the co-founder of our police orientation preparation program and the reason why all of us are meeting here today. And so, Ira, if you have a few words as we close the meeting this morning, we'd like to hear from you.
Thank you, Joe. Can you hear me okay?
You bet.
Before I formally thank Chief Bratton, I'd just like to acknowledge a few other people who helped us take the original idea and develop it and enhance it from the wonderful gift that the Chief gave us. The best gift he gave us was, of course, Chief MacArthur, who had to take an idea and turn it into reality. And there she is. And Chief MacArthur gave the program its name. We're very grateful for her. The Police Academy Magnet School Foundation Board, our treasurer, Dr. Elliot Ponchik, our secretary, Seppi Azadi from Corn Ferry. Dr. Ponchik is the executive director of the Bannerman Foundation. Of course, Assistant Chief MacArthur, retired. Dr. Ron Vogel, who is the Dean of Health and Human Services at Cal State LA, which is one of our partners. Jamie Tam, Vice President at Royal Bank of Canada. Joan Martin, retired LA Unified Counselor, who was with us from day one with the Magnet Schools 30 years ago. Dana Hollinger, partner with ABG Advisory, who, by the way, is also my wife, and she's in the background someplace, but she doesn't want to be seen. Thank you. And Fran Poncher, of course. Jim Limbaugh, the president of West LA College, and his team. Sergeant Coons, his team consisting of officers Erickson, Windsor, and Sergeant Cuddy, who takes care of the magnet schools. Our lead community college faculty member, Eric Brack, who I see is down there underneath Sergeant Coons. Brendan Wagner, who'll be leaving us to be an assistant principal at LA Unified. And finally, retired LA Unified Superintendent Ray Cortinas, who gave us the other green light. Bill, thank you for doing this. I feel
Thank you.
inspired. I am inspired. And were it not for you, we wouldn't have this program. Thank you. We'll always be grateful for what you did. And we will not only maintain the program, we're going to try to enhance it. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And Bill?
I'll look forward to getting back to LA and seeing everybody once again. And Sandy Joe, we can head down to MacArthur Park and head over to that great deli there.
Sounds good.
The best New
We'll
York
see you.
beef sandwiches in LA.
There you go.
We'll see you at Langer's Deli.
We'll see you at Langer's. Okay.
Everybody
All the best
stay
to everybody.
safe.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you.